Ladies and gentlemen, I will convene the meeting of the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations today. And I would call the members to the agenda in the front of their book. And particularly the first item of business that we have would be the minutes of the September 21 meeting, 2021 meeting. And I presume that all of you have read those minutes. And I would ask for a vote to receive the minutes. Senator Lundberg, is there a second, please? Do I have a second? Do I see a second? Patsy. Oh, Patsy, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Properly moved and seconded. Do we have any questions, any changes or additions to the minutes? There being none, then we will take a vote on a voice vote. Those in favor of receiving the minutes say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. It carries unanimously. Thank you. I'll defer now to our Executive Director, Dr. Lippert, who will give us a staff update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few items of just general information for the Commission before the staff update, and this is just for your own information. The first of these, as you, I'm sure, have already heard, back in October, Governor Lee called for a review of the Tennessee's education funding formula, the BEP, the Basic Education Program formula. And as you're also aware, TACIR's had a long involvement with the BEP. We, along with the University of Tennessee Center for Business and Economic Research, prepare the fiscal capacity formulas that are used in the BEP. Plus, we also have a seat on the BEP review committee. So in that role, we continue to monitor the progress of the governor's review. And just as another reminder, you did vote as a commission back in January of last year, January of 2020, that a comprehensive review of the BEP funding components be made by the BEPRC or other designated state and local officials and other stakeholders to ensure that the BEP funding formula supports a commonly accepted basic level of education for Tennessee students. So along the same veins of what's happening with the current review. So we'll just continue to monitor the progress and, of course, stand ready to assist if requested. The second item, unless there are any questions on that, the second item is on the Local Government Planning Advisory Committee, which TACIR also has a role in, though a more informal role. Bill Terry, our senior research consultant, serves in an advisory role to LGPAC. They do not have any full-time planners on staff since the state's planning office went away several years ago. The Tennessee General Assembly's Judiciary and Government Joint Subcommittee of Government Operations voted to recommend the sunset of LGPAC and a one-year wind down. This leaves open a number of questions on how the functions that are currently performed by LGPAC will be performed in the future, or if the statute's going to change those functions. And this is all still very much in flux. We've been meeting with the Department of Economic and Community Development, offering our input on it. We did make clear that although we do serve as the kind of the de facto repository for all the growth plans currently, and we actually have those digitally on our website if you ever want to peruse them. We don't think it would be appropriate, and it would be counter our mission for us to have a more formal role. In other words, we don't want to take over LGPAC ourselves. We don't think that would be the mission of TACIR. But we are interested in making sure that the functions that are performed by LGPAC are able to continue on. So we'll keep you informed of that as well. And then, Mr. Chairman, if there's no questions on that, I do have a couple of staff updates.
Please, are there any questions you'd like to put to the Director of? There being none. Very good. Please continue.
So both of our staff updates today are for one staff member. It's our research manager, Michael Mount. Michael, in addition to his very full workload, has been very busy in his professional training as well. You may recall, those of you who have been with us for a couple of years, we presented our learning pyramid, our professional development pyramid that we used at TACIR back a couple of years ago, back in 2018. This is modeled on the Department of Human Resources' own training pyramid, though ours has more more of a research-specific focus to it, as well as some serious writing components to it. Well, Michael is the first of our staff members to complete all 4 levels of the pyramid. And this involved, I want to make sure I get this right, in addition to completing 30 separate DOHR and TACIR developed training modules, it also took 70 hours of elective training, so quite a bit of work. Michael was the first jackrabbit through the gate there. In addition to that, he also just recently completed the Tennessee Government Management Institute program, which is a 2-week residential management institute that provides mid-level managers in state government with the opportunity for academic study, learning, and practical management skills and cross-agency networking. So if you could just join me in congratulating Michael on these accomplishments. Mr. Chairman, that completes the update.
Thank you, Director Lippert. I'll ask the members to look at, go to tab 3. And as we do, I will introduce Michael Mount, our research manager, who is going to make the presentation on Public Chapter 585 for the Public Acts of 2021, his final report on the Gold State Depository.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioners, I'm Michael Mount. I'll be presenting the Commission's report that was prepared in response to Public Chapter 585, Acts of 2021, which directed the Commission to study the feasibility of creating a state gold depository, including whether other states or jurisdictions have created one. The report can be found behind tab 3, and it is submitted for your approval. Since the draft report was presented at the last meeting, staff have added information regarding the fiscal notes for sales tax exemption bills. We've added information regarding the effect of sales tax exemptions on state and local sales tax bases, and continue to refine other information in the report. These changes are highlighted for your convenience. Although information was added to clarify all the factors that make storing precious metals in Tennessee less attractive to both institutional and individual investors than storing it in other states, the finding that a state gold depository is not viable remains unchanged from the draft report. And it reads as follows. Stakeholders say that Tennessee's sales tax on precious metal coins and bullion is one factor that stands in the way of the viability of a depository in Tennessee, because Tennessees can avoid paying sales tax by buying and storing precious metals in states that do not tax the sales. But a sales tax exemption on its own may not generate enough demand to cover the high cost of building and operating a depository. Another factor is Tennessee's location outside of established markets for gold and silver, such as COMEX. In addition, the state treasury is not authorized or inclined to invest in gold. Given the factors that make storing precious metals in Tennessee less attractive to both institutional and individual investors than storing it in other states, and the fact that no institutional investment funds seem inclined at this point to buy or store gold in Tennessee, there does not appear to be enough demand for a state gold depository to be viable. In addition to this finding, the draft report made one recommendation related to a sales tax exemption for precious metals, coins, and bullion. Although the district court ruled in favor of Kentucky and Tennessee in Kentucky et al. V. Yellen, the recommendation remains unchanged, and it reads as follows. Delaying enacting a sales tax exemption for precious metal coins and bullion may help ensure that Tennessee does not lose any of the federal funds that it is set to receive through the American Rescue Plan Act. The act includes a provision that requires states to give back federal funds used for a reduction in the net tax revenue. If the General Assembly enacts a sales tax exemption that results in a reduction in the net tax revenue of the state before Tennessee receives or spends all of the $4 billion that it is set to receive through the act, the state may have to give back some federal funds. In June 2021, Kentucky and Tennessee filed a lawsuit contesting the constitutionality of the provision in Kentucky et al. V. Yellen. Although the district court ruled in favor of Kentucky and Tennessee, the decision could be appealed. The lawsuit was one of 6 filed by state attorneys general challenging the provision. Resolution of the lawsuits may provide clarity regarding the effect on federal funds for Tennessee were Tennessee to enact a sales tax exemption. But until then, enacting a sales tax exemption for precious metals may result in Tennessee giving back some federal funds. For these reasons, the General Assembly could consider a sales tax exemption for precious metal coins and bullion if it becomes clear that the exemption will not violate the American Rescue Plan Act or once all the federal funds have been spent. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mount. I think Representative Halsey has come in the room, and I'd received word that perhaps you were interested in making comments to the committee. If you would come up now and make those comments, and gentlemen, we'll hear his comments, and then I'll entertain if there's a motion to approve after we have heard from the representative.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee. And I appreciate TACIR taking time to look at this. And I guess my appeal is that you do understand gold for 5,000 years has been the best of currency. It is the only financial asset that is not somebody else's liability to repay you. It's treated as a Tier 1 asset or collateral. And so if you're going to hold on to gold, you probably don't want to. You'd probably want to do it outside the banking system, which would be a depository. The thing that troubles me the most about this is I don't think we've ever been in this kind of position in the United States before monetarily. $30 trillion in debt. You can see where the current administration, Washington's head's at when they nominated a known communist and a receiver of the Lenin Award to be the commissioner of currency in this country. Those kinds of things scare me. And when you look out in the future and see what's the possibility of what could happen in this country, it really troubles me. And so a gold depository, to me, is very common sense. And I do understand the questions that TACIR had, and I don't have an answer for them. We do need to get rid of the tax on gold bullion and precious metal bullion and rare coins in this state. I think we're only one of 7 states left that are doing this. A man who deals in gold out of Michigan, that's what his life's work is, wanted to move to Tennessee 2 years ago when we ran this bill to get rid of it. And he didn't do that, but he did tell me that we are losing tens of millions of dollars leaving this state to go purchase gold bullion in other states that don't have this tax. So I agree, we have to get rid of that. It troubles me what can happen and is looming in the future, and our responsibility in Tennessee to keep Tennessee people as solvent as we can keep them for as long as we can keep them that way. To me, a gold depository is a great thing. And I can't remember if I mentioned to you before that there is a group of investors actually out of Nashville who contacted me last year who want to fund this and build it. They will build it themselves. They'll maintain it themselves. They'll staff it themselves, but Tennessee gets to run it. So there is no expense to Tennessee taxpayers to get this in the works. I do not have an answer for the issue with the federal government and money that they've given away if we reduce taxes on the other side of that. I don't have an answer for that. I don't know. I am asking TACIR, help me. Help me find a way to make this work. I think it's hugely important, and not only does Tennessee get to run it, Tennessee gets a revenue stream off of it when it finally builds to the place where it can. So, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Representative. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion on the final report on Public Chapter 585. Chair would entertain a motion. There's a motion. Do we have a second to approve? Is there a second on the motion? There's a second, so there's a motion to approve the report of Chapter 585. Now, is there any discussion, debate on this issue? Yes, sir. Mr. Clifton?
Mount, you refer to the court ruling in favor of Kentucky and Tennessee, but that decision could be appealed. What's the time frame and the deadline for an appeal to be filed?
It's not clear yet. I don't think every district has finished their lawsuits, which I think would in turn determine the timeline for an appeal. And so until that's determined, and there may not be an appeal, but it's just a possibility. So bottom line is I don't know.
So we don't know if there's a deadline.
I mean, ultimately, it would probably need to happen before the funds are spent through the act in the next several years, but possibly before then as well.
Are there other questions? Or yes, Mayor.
Typically, there'd be 30 days to file a notice of appeal, but the issue is not necessarily what if an appeal were to go to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals here, because it is pending in other districts. For example, a district court judge in California could rule contrary to the way the court ruled here, which means then you've got conflicting results in the district courts and maybe even then conflicting results in the appellate courts, right? The Ninth Circuit could say it's okay, the Sixth Circuit could say it's not. So it may not necessarily, it may be months, if not a year, before there's any clarity on that. Because just because one judge has ruled that way, it doesn't mean another district judge in another state won't have a conflicting ruling. And so we would know the result in Tennessee, but we would have to await the resolution of that conflicting of rulings. So it may be a long time before we actually know whether or not this is something that if this would put Tennessee's federal funds at risk. Thank you.
All right, are there other questions? Mayor Frank?
I do have one for the representative.
If the representative could come up here, please.
I was intrigued in our report about gold and silver in Wyoming, Utah, Oklahoma, and Arizona being legal tender. What do you think, would that have a beneficial impact on what you're trying to accomplish here with the depository?
I think probably any venue that opens that up probably is a good thing. And the reason I say that, I'm scared to death with what the Fed's talking about now. Used to be 5 years ago, only about one member would talk about a digital currency. Now all of them are talking about it. And you do understand, for Tennessee people, if that goes into place, you either obey or you don't get an account, or you obey, or just exactly like they do in China, your account gets shut off and nobody can buy or sell. So to me, any alternative that provides an escape from that kind of tyranny is a good thing. Thank you.
Are there other questions? Other questions? There being none, then we are ready to vote on the motion to approve Public Chapter 5, the final report on Public Chapter 585. And we will take a voice vote. Those in favor of approval of the final report say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion to approve carries, and the final report for Public Chapter 585 is approved. Thank you. At this time, we will move into the next item on our agenda, which is tab 4. We have a panel discussion on Public Chapter 503 of the Public Acts of 2021 on relative to childhood obesity. And Dr. Kevin Van Zandt, our research associate, will introduce the members of the panel to us. And I believe that you will also let us know, I think that were we going to reverse the order of any of the speakers in this one? You will take, as you introduce them, we'll let you take care of that. Dr. Van Zandt. Good afternoon, yeah. No, but I will.
See?
Thank you.
The childhood obesity study comes to TACIR from Public Chapter 503, Acts of 2021, which directed TACIR to perform a comprehensive evaluation on the socioeconomic impact childhood obesity has in Tennessee and its short and long-term effects. The memo for the panel, as the chairman said, can be found under tab 4. Today's panel is the second presentation on this topic for the commission. At our September meeting, the commission heard from Dr. Sherry Barkin, the Director of Pediatric Obesity Research at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, who presented information on the consequences of childhood obesity on the health and well-being of Tennessee residents and her own research into the possibilities of effective interventions at different stages of childhood development. Today, the commission will hear from 3 subject matter experts who will build on that earlier discussion by focusing on the specific challenges of implementing public health policies that relate to childhood obesity, given the complexity of the problem and the many different factors involved. The panel will also discuss the ongoing efforts to combat childhood obesity that are already in place at the Tennessee Departments of Health and Education and the collaboration and coordination on this issue between different stakeholders across the state. The 3 panel participants, in the order they will be presenting in, so this is a change from the memo, are Dr. Jacqueline Yennerall, Assistant Professor of Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Tennessee, Lori Paisley, the Senior Director for Coordinated School Health and District Operations at the Tennessee Department of Education, and Leslie Meehan, the Director of the Office of Primary Prevention at the Tennessee Department of Health. Lori Paisley has provided the commission with a handout, which can be found under tab 4, and Dr. Yennerall has a handout as well, which I believe was handed out to the commission members. We greatly appreciate all 3 panelists agreeing to speak with the commission. Each one brings to their remarks today extensive experience and expertise on this issue, as well as impressive records of public service. Each panelist will speak for 10 to 15 minutes and will then be happy to take questions from the commission. And now, if there are no questions for me.
Yes, sir. I do want to offer one change. The chair would like that and request that if we have questions for the panelists, that we wait till the conclusion of the presentations and then ask our questions at that time instead of during the presentations. I think that would be a better economy of time. So we will we encourage you to ask questions or make comments, but we will do it at the conclusion of the panel's presentations, unless there's an objection from Dr. Van Zandt.
That's fine.
And there is none, and we appreciate that. So,
thank you. I'll call up the presenters now. Okay.
Go ahead.
Dr. Yennerall.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Jacqueline Yennerall. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Tennessee. And I just wanted to first thank you all for giving me the opportunity to come speak with you today about the socioeconomic impacts of childhood obesity. So I will focus on the impacts from an economic perspective and provide a discussion of the cost of the different impacts when possible. So for the purposes of today's discussion, children will include anyone under the age of 18, and because the impacts of child obesity can extend into adulthood, I will also review some of the impacts for adults, which would then be anyone over the age of 18. I should note that the adult impacts I discussed today are measured for adults with obesity, which would include both adults who developed obesity in childhood and those that developed obesity in adulthood. There are also a very limited number of studies that attempt to estimate lifetime impacts, which estimate the impact of obesity over the course of an individual's lifetime, and so we will review those last. So in economics, we tend to categorize the impacts of a health condition into 2 categories: the direct effect on medical care and an indirect effect on productivity. So generally, we are concerned with productivity related to work or employment outcomes, but since children generally do not work, we'll consider the indirect effect of childhood obesity on educational outcomes. So we'll first review the evidence related to the impact of obesity on medical care utilization and cost. We might expect individuals with obesity to use more medical services because obesity increases the likelihood of developing certain health conditions, such as diabetes, hypertension, stroke, cancer, and high cholesterol. Since these health conditions require treatment, they may also contribute to higher healthcare costs associated with obesity. And when measuring either healthcare utilization or cost, there are generally three categories to consider: outpatient doctor visits, which include the cost to see a doctor and receive medical care or treatment that does not require admission to a hospital; inpatient hospital stays, which occur when an individual receives medical care treatment that requires admission to a hospital; and prescription drug costs. So to determine the medical care use or cost attributed to obesity, researchers compare individuals with obesity to an individual with a body mass index, or BMI, in a range that would be categorized as normal. Right, so BMI is calculated by dividing a person's weight by their height squared, and for children, obesity is determined using age and sex-specific growth charts from the Center for Disease Control. So the growth charts for boys and girls are attached to the end of your handout. The top line on the chart marked 95 can be used to find the BMI level for the 95th percentile for each age. And the 95th percentile tells us that 95% of children have a BMI below that level. So for example, on the boys chart, the 95th percentile for 18-year-olds is approximately 29, which tells us that 95% of 18-year-old boys have a BMI below 29. Children with a BMI above the 95th percentile are categorized as obese. Overweight is categorized as a BMI between the 85th and the 95th percentile, and a BMI below the 85th percentile qualifies as being in a normal range. So returning to the relationship between childhood obesity and medical care, prior research does not find a strong and consistent relationship between childhood obesity and medical use. Not only do some studies find no association at all, but others find the relationship depends on the age of the child, and in some studies they found the relationship differs both by sex or race. So some studies have found that utilization is higher amongst older children, so those above the age of 10, and that utilization is lower amongst African American, Hispanic, and Asian American obese children. So many studies assessing the relationship between childhood obesity and medical care expenditures come to a similar conclusion, likely due to the fact that healthcare costs are driven by healthcare utilization. So one study by Adam Biener, John Cawley, and Chad Meyerhofer did find that obesity in children aged 11 to 17 increased medical care expenditures by an average of $907 per year. They also repeated their analysis using a child's BMI Z-score rather than an indicator for obesity, and the results from that analysis are contained in Figure 1 of your handout. Recall that childhood obesity is determined using age and sex-specific growth charts, and because their analysis used all children, a transformation of the raw BMI score, known as a Z-score, was used to address some of the differences in BMI due to age and gender. The solid line in the figure gives the relationship between the percentile BMI score, which is on the horizontal axis, and total medical expenditures, which are on the left-hand side vertical axis. The dashed lines above and below the solid line are the 95% confidence interval for the estimated relationship between BMI score and medical expenditures. The solid line shows that for much of the range of the BMI Z-score, the estimated annual medical expenditures are around $1,000, and it isn't until after the BMI score is in the range for obesity that medical expenditures begin to increase rapidly and approach $3,000 for the highest BMI Z-score percentiles. So this type of relationship is also referred to as nonlinear because the increase in medical expenditures is not the same across all BMI Z-scores. The dotted line shows the percentage of children in the sample with a BMI Z-score and the different percentiles. And so jointly, the figure shows that the largest medical expenditures are concentrated in a small percentage of children with very high BMI Z-scores. So while the relationship between childhood obesity and medical expenditures isn't consistently positive, the evidence is clear in adults that obesity is associated with higher medical care expenditures. Similar to in children, in adults, there's also a strong nonlinear relationship between BMI and medical care expenditures. So Figure 2 contains the results from an analysis by John Cawley and Chad Meyerhofer, who applied the same statistical methods they used in the childhood obesity study from Figure 1 to adults. So they found that obesity increases average annual medical expenditures by around $2,741. However, as demonstrated in the figure, most of the costs are driven by individuals with very high BMIs, especially for those in the range for severe obesity, which occurs when a BMI exceeds a value of 40. So this nonlinear relationship between BMI and medical expenditures in adults has been found in other studies. Evidence also suggests that medical expenditures for obesity are higher for women, lower for African Americans, increasing in age, and are largely due to obesity-related health conditions such as diabetes, heart disease, high cholesterol, and cancer. So the remaining question in this literature is how much of the costs associated with these other health conditions can be attributed to or is caused by obesity, and how much of the costs are due to other non-obesity risk factors. So next I'll discuss some of the indirect effects of childhood obesity. For children, these indirect effects can come from the relationship between obesity and primary school outcomes. So one potential cost of childhood obesity could come from increased absences from school due to the negative health effects of obesity. This would be concerning because there's consistent evidence that shows children who attend school regularly tend to have higher levels of academic performance. So prior research has consistently found that childhood obesity is associated with greater odds of being absent from school. It's about a 27% greater odds for overweight children and 54% greater odds for obese children. However, researchers caution that it's unclear if the absences are due to a negative physical health effects or the stigma and bullying that overweight and obese children are more likely to experience. So since obese children are more likely to be absent from school, we might expect that to impact their academic performance, which is generally measured using teacher evaluations, grades, and scores from standardized exams. So there is some evidence that suggests obesity is associated with lower academic performance, but it's generally weak, and the relationship is reduced or eliminated after controlling for socioeconomic status, parents' educational attainment, physical activity, and the presence of other health conditions. So in adults, we'll review the indirect effects that come from the relationship between obesity and labor market outcomes such as employment, wages, and worker productivity. In economics, we focus on these labor market effects because they have a cost to employers and society due to the wages individuals earn while at work. So there's a well-established negative relationship between weight and wages, which is also referred to as the weight penalty. The weight penalty differs between men and women and by race. So in the United States, the wage penalty is strongest for white women, and some studies suggest that an additional 10 pounds decreases wages by 2.8% for women. However, there are also studies that have found this effect is largest for women with a BMI near the obese threshold, which would suggest the weight penalty is not driven by the negative health effects of obesity. There are some similar findings for other employment outcomes, which find both obese individuals are more likely to experience negative outcomes in decisions related to hiring and promotion, but these negative outcomes are more likely due to discrimination than the negative health effects. So once an individual is employed, obesity may also affect their productivity. Generally, this is measured through absenteeism, which is the number of days an employee misses work, and presenteeism, which measures an employee's ability to be productive during the workday. So absenteeism can be measured through recorded sick days or early retirement, while presenteeism is generally measured through surveys. So the table in your handout includes the results from a single systematic review, but they are generally representative of 3 findings regarding the relationship between obesity and worker productivity. So first, the excess costs of absenteeism and presenteeism for obesity are positive, indicated there may be some productivity costs associated with obesity. And I also reviewed one study that found these productivity costs are higher for individuals with more severe obesity. Second, the cost of presenteeism is generally higher than the cost of absenteeism. And so finally, the table shows there are a wide range of estimates for these costs. So this indicates the estimates, the costs are sensitive to the different methods used to calculate the cost. So given the prior research that has found that there are costs related to obesity in childhood and adulthood, Researchers have also sought to determine the lifetime costs associated with childhood obesity, which would capture the costs associated with obesity as a child ages. There are a very limited number of studies which attempt to measure a lifetime cost, in part due to the challenges of collecting data on an individual over the course of their life. Due to this challenge, several of the studies use simulation models to try and estimate cost. These studies also vary based on what costs they include in their estimates, whether they include just medical costs, or they also attempt to include productivity costs. And the result is that there is a great deal of variability in these estimates. While they do suggest lifetime costs are positive in increasing in the severity of BMI, they also find that most of the costs associated with obesity occur later in life. These estimates are also influenced by the likelihood that obese children remain obese into adulthood and the likelihood that obese children develop an obesity-related health condition as an adult. Research that studies these questions separately from estimating the lifetime costs has found that while childhood obesity persists into adulthood, it does not account for a large proportion of adults, of the prevalence of adult obesity. So this suggests that most individuals who are obese in adulthood become obese after childhood. Studies have also found that while childhood obesity is associated with a moderately increased risk for developing obesity-related health conditions in adult, childhood obesity is not a strong predictor for the development of adult health conditions. So in summary, we've seen that childhood obesity has an impact on medical care costs and expenditures. However, the impact on medical expenditures is concentrated among those with a very high BMI, and the impact on academics may be unrelated to the health impacts of obesity. Thus, there may be a benefit to addressing childhood obesity, but it may need to be targeted to specific subpopulations. Additionally, the benefits to society may be limited because of the substantial number of adults who become obese in adulthood. This does raise the possibility that interventions may be most beneficial if they can simultaneously address obesity-related health conditions in children and adults. For children, this could suggest taking a family or community-oriented approach. There's also an economic rationale for such an approach because children do not have full control over their decisions related to food consumption or physical activities. And because their activities and choices are constrained by adults, that would include their parents, guardians, caretakers, and teachers. All right, changing the outcomes for children may also require influencing the behavior of adults that are in their life. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions.
Unless there's objection, we'll wait till we get to all the presenters and then take the questions. And there being none, we'll proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Dr. Van Zant said, I am Lori Paisley, Senior Director of Coordinated School Health at Tennessee Department of Education. Tennessee leads the nation by providing a coordinated school health initiative in every school district. The Coordinated School Health Coordinator in each school district ensures a systematic approach is implemented to create and sustain healthy school environments so students can receive the support that they need to make healthy choices. The Tennessee Department of Education Office of Coordinated School Health supports school districts through the primary mission of Coordinated School Health, which is improving student health outcomes by supporting the connection between good health practices, academic achievement, and lifetime wellness. Coordinated School Health encourages healthy lifestyles, provides needed support to at-risk students, and helps to reduce the prevalence of health issues that impair academic success. Coordinated School Health is an effective approach designed to connect health with learning and aims to improve students' health and their capacity to learn through the support of families, communities, and schools working together. The involvement of parents, families, and community is the glue that binds Coordinated School Health. Full involvement of these entities as partners in the educational process provides valuable input, increases the commitment of all partners, and ensures positive educational and health outcomes. Coordinated School Health coordinators across the state develop an annual action plan for their districts, and those action plans include one goal, related objectives, and action steps to address student obesity in their school district. This goal must include an objective on physical activity, an objective on nutrition, an objective on comprehensive health education, and an objective on increasing parent outreach and involvement regarding childhood obesity prevention. My team and I at the Department of Education support the development, review, and approval of these annual goals each year, and we also provide professional development to school districts throughout the year in these areas. Also, the state board approved K-12 health education standards include personal wellness components which support physical activity and fitness and nutrition. While K-8 standards, K-8 standards are not mandated, the lifetime wellness standards, which are the high school standards, are, as that course is a graduation requirement in Tennessee. Those specific standards have our high school students identifying the relationship between healthy eating and total wellness, as well as implementing health-related and skill-related components of fitness, and they also construct fitness goals for themselves. Districts also have a student wellness policy that ensures that districts promote healthy schools by supporting wellness, good nutrition, and regular physical activity as part of the total learning environment. At least once every 3 years, the district's coordinated school health and school nutrition staff evaluate compliance with the wellness policy to assess the implementation of that policy within their school district and schools. Districts actively inform families and the public of the availability of the triennial progress report via their school district website and/or district-wide communications. Coordinated school health is not a program, but it's a systematic approach to promoting student health that emphasizes needs assessment and planning based on data. This approach consists of 8 major components, and all 8 components work together to improve the lives of students and their families and the staff at the school. The 8 components include health education, health services, counseling, psychological and social services, nutrition, physical education and physical activity, school staff wellness, healthy school environment, and student, parent, and community involvement. While these components are listed separately, it is their composite that allows coordinated school health to have a significant impact. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is...
Could you speak up, please?
Yeah. There we go. Is that better? All right.
Much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Leslie Meehan with the Tennessee Department of Health. It's a pleasure to be here, and a very good pleasure to present with both Lori and Jackie, who are longtime colleagues. Good to see you both. We're going to back out just for a moment and look at the 30,000-foot level for childhood obesity. What we're talking about is a very complex problem, and it has a variety of solutions, and we really need to be thinking about the multi-solving involved for childhood obesity. It is not an issue that has just one simple solution. And in fact, when we look at the health of all Tennesseans, you may have heard of the term social determinants of health. And if you haven't, it simply means the environments in which we all live in our community spaces and the choices that we're able to either make or not make in those environments. So for all of us, there are some fundamental tenets for our lives that influence our health. And those can include things like, do we have access to food? Do we have access to transportation? Do we have access to stable housing? Do we have educational opportunities? And do the adult members have employment opportunities? And without some of those fundamental tenets, we cannot have a whole life. We cannot have the health that we would all like to have in our lives. And so if one of those pieces is missing, it's really hard for the others to compensate. You can't not have a stable home and expect to have a solid health outcome. So when we think about childhood obesity, we really are evolving from where we were even 5 and 10 years ago, where we thought mostly about what we eat, so what kind of calories are we consuming, and then how much physical activity is a child getting. We now know that obesity is influenced by a lot more than just those 2 things. You may have also heard of adverse childhood experiences, and the majority of us in this room will have experienced at least one. That can include things like a parental divorce, parental incarceration, death in the family. We also are more aware now more than ever about the impact of mental health on our physical health, and that can certainly influence our metabolism and how we basically digest our food. Our sleep can also influence our metabolism, and even things like crime. So if a child's living in a crime-ridden area, they're not getting the proper sleep, they have, again, a lot of mental stress, all of these things can influence childhood obesity. So for that reason, childhood obesity is more than just an issue that the Department of Education or the Department of Health can tackle alone. And in fact, if we try to tackle it just from one department or another, we're really looking at a problem and trying to treat it as a singular problem that, again, has a singular solution when it truly does not. So the approach that we are taking at the Department of Health is to think about this as a holistic problem and realize that we're not just talking about obese children, but we're also talking about the whole family unit, because children follow the health of the other family members. If the adults in the home are also unhealthy, then it's more challenging for a child to have good health. So a few solutions that we are doing at the Tennessee Department of Health. About 5 years ago, we started something called the Tennessee Livability Collaborative. And this was a name chosen by the 20 state departments, agencies, and commissions that make up the collaborative. And the idea is that we are better together if we know one another's missions and objectives as departments, agencies, and commissions. And we can, in fact, be better fiscal stewards of the state's resources if we're partnering together on not only our goals as those agencies, but the resources that we have and how we implement those resources with our staff. So in those 5 years, the collaborative has partnered on a number of objectives, and currently we are actually creating a data dashboard for the state in partnership with the governor's office and the Office of Customer Focused Government. This will be a livability index for the state that, again, will help us to better understand how are we doing around arenas such as housing and transportation, food systems, education, jobs, mental health, et cetera. So we are whittling down that set of indicators now. And our hope is that as the cabinet level agencies and departments are forming their strategic plans, this will help us to sing from the same hymnal, if you will. Since we know that obesity is influenced by all of these different facets, if we have better coordination among state entities as we're developing not only our objectives, but the measurement of those objectives and how we hope to see success, then we anticipate that we will have better overall coordination in a number of areas and see better results, not just in obesity, but in a lot of other facets of livability for Tennesseans. Another program that we started about 4 to 5 years ago is something called our Healthy Built Environment Grants. The places in which we live greatly influence the choices we're able to make, as we've previously discussed. And so in our environments, we need to be thinking about the opportunities for access to healthy food and physical activity. We have counties in Tennessee, as you're aware, that don't have a full-service grocery store in the entire county. We also have counties that don't have a single playground, even at the local school in a county. So 4 years ago, the department created a grant program where we provide funding for communities to convene, to create a plan, such as a greenways master plan, a parks master plan. It could be a downtown redevelopment plan. We provide money for building infrastructure and also programming. So for example, a running club for children to have an opportunity for physical activity after school. The interest in this program has been really outstanding. Even during COVID last year, we offered only $800,000. That was what we had available. We received 13 times more funding requests than we had funding, and we've consistently received applications from nearly 90% of the state's counties every year. And this has demonstrated to us that there is a strong understanding that there is a tie-in between economic development, tourism, and health, and that quality of life piece. And that when communities have things like an interesting greenway system, an inclusive playground. They have a farmer's market pavilion that can also be used as a community venue. That these are great attractions for, again, not only businesses but families to come to communities, to stay in communities, and to really provide those assets we all want in our communities so that we can be happy and have a quality of life. And so we're really talking about health, not as something that we should do, right? We're not going out and telling people to eat their fruits and vegetables and to walk their 10,000 steps a day. What we're really doing is encouraging communities to be developed where these things are happening organically and because people want to participate in them. A couple other things I'll just quickly mention. We have an incredible opportunity because we have clinics in all 95 counties. We routinely see almost 1 million patients a year and about 1.7 million clinical visits. So this gives us, again, a direct touch point with a good chunk of the state's population where we are able to hear directly about transportation challenges, food challenges, legal service challenges, housing challenges, all those types of things. And so we are currently working on a new electronic medical record system for our department so that we can capture some of these challenges when we see a patient and that we can hopefully get to a point where we can refer them to some solutions for the things that they're facing. We are also helping our staff to better understand decision-making bodies across the state because our staff, again, has that direct touch point, and we can help introduce them to the bodies such as planning commissions, a Parks and Recreation Board, a zoning commission. These types of boards and commissions are the ones that are making decisions that are influencing how a community is shaped and thus helping to influence how our health is shaped in those communities. So our goal is to get more health professionals at the table, either formally or informally, providing public comment or maybe even sitting on a board or a commission to help that community entity shape their decision-making in a way that can have more positive impacts on health. We also have some really interesting programs. Just for fun to mention, we know that language nutrition, so how much we talk to children when they're infants, really influences third grade reading levels, which influences high school graduation rates, which influences a lot of other parts of our health as we're adults. So we have a program called Talk With Me Baby, where we model for caregivers how to talk with their children. And we have given out 80,000 board books in both Spanish and English so that we in our clinics can start talking about the importance for language nutrition. And we also have a couple of other programs. We, of course, administer the Women, Infant, Children program, which provides supplemental nutrition for expectant mothers and children that are age 5 or below. We are very proud that that system is now electronic, which alleviates a more antiquated system of needing to have a voucher when you're paying for your groceries. And we're proud of our statewide partnership to have the Gold Sneaker Initiative in daycares, which is an opportunity for daycares to really be promoting some of these health influencing behaviors in daycares, and they can receive a gold certification because we recognize that childhood obesity starts at a very young age. So those are just a sample of things that we are doing at the Tennessee Department of Health. We feel that we have an incredible moment in time right now because we have received as a state an enormous amount of stimulus money, and it's given us an opportunity to think differently about physical infrastructure. For example, we have an opportunity to think beyond just water and sewer infrastructure, but some of the other assets of a community. Again, these parks and greenways and farmers market pavilions, grocery stores, playgrounds, splash pads, those kinds of things. And we also have an opportunity that we are now more cognizant than ever of how important our physical and mental health is for our quality of life. And the Department of Health is just grateful for this opportunity to talk with you today about some of these many facets of health and childhood obesity.
Thank you very much. And now I will open to the body for questions or comments. Do we have questions? Mr. Huffman, were you raising your hand, sir? No. Okay. Yes, Mayor?
I just have a question regarding the, let's see, it seemed like for every additional 10 pounds over the, I suppose, ideal weight, that a woman's wages decreased by 2.8%. 8%. What causes that? What would be the reason behind that?
So that estimate is kind of over the full range of weight. It wasn't, that particular study didn't look at just right around the overweight or obese threshold. So in general, for every 10 pounds a woman gains, her wages decline by 2.8%. And again, a lot of the hypothesis around why that occurs has to do with discrimination, that women who are overweight are undervalued. And the way that they have kind of come to that possible hypothesis is through other studies that have found this wage penalty is higher for women who are in service positions, so waitresses, people who work in front of desks, somewhere where their physical appearance would be more apparent. We don't see it as much for individuals who are in like computer sciences. And there are kind of other experimental ways to do this too that I can talk about if that would be of interest.
Mm-hmm. A question, Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question, a couple. Is the incidence of type 1 diabetes in children increasing just like the incidence of type 2 in children, type 1 versus type 2? And then my second question is, as diabetes proceeds earlier in a person's age, it's more and more childhood diabetes is evident. Doesn't that mean that later in the healthcare system, as these children get older, that you're going to see earlier strokes, earlier heart disease? And isn't that going to have a pretty dramatic impact on the cost of their healthcare system and also the capacity to handle these additional folks?
I'm not familiar with the trends in type 1 or type 2 diabetes. I think those would be really great questions to ask a medical doctor. But what I will say is I think that, again, pointing to these rises in these kind of healthcare conditions, such as type 1 or type 2 diabetes, that is another good reason to focus on the other health outcomes rather than just obesity. And it depends on treatment for those conditions, right? So, and again, this is a question we need an epidemiologist or a medical doctor for. I don't know what the treatment plan is for someone with type 2 diabetes and how it would cost after it's under control or how that evolves into adulthood. But it is certainly possible. Certainly if you are diagnosed with a healthcare condition that is expensive to treat in childhood, if it persists in adulthood, it is possible that that would could increase medical care costs in the long run.
Chairman, if I could follow up.
Yes.
In Tennessee, the childhood diabetes numbers, and these are in here, how does Tennessee's children compare to children in the surrounding counties, states that are contiguous to us in our region? Any idea?
I'm not sure where you're saying it's in there. I thought that might be in Jackie's presentation. I don't think it's in mine, but I can actually get you the numbers. We collect a health services survey from each school district, and they tell us what student diagnoses that their students in the district have, and we can look at the trends of that. I'm sorry I didn't bring that with me today, but we do ask, and I think you're onto something because we are seeing more students, particularly with type 2 diabetes. The trend is increasing, as you mentioned.
It would just be interesting to know if Tennessee children stand out statistically from everyone else, or if we're all, you know, pretty much bunched together and it's a problem throughout the region here, this part of the country. Thank you.
And if you don't mind, ma'am, if you would make that information available to the director, Lippert, and then if you would consider letting all the members see that information, that would be useful, I think. That'd be all right. Thank you.
Report was just issued on the state of obesity in the nation, and so we can get that report to you as well because it closely ties, obviously, with diabetes. But if Dr. Barkin was here, she's also a close colleague, and I think I could speak for her. But I hear from her anecdotally talking about the number of children that she sees in her clinic who are already at an obesity rate that is putting them on a very grim trajectory for their lives. And we do know that we have more and more people that are experiencing blindness or experiencing an amputation of a limb, that kind of thing, at an earlier and earlier age because of type 2 diabetes. So whereas something like that may have happened later on in life, we do know that we are seeing people in their 20s, for example, who are experiencing some pretty severe effects already of diabetes.
20s. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other
Thank you,
questions? Chairman Hazelwood?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm just in the handout from Dr. Yarnell. There is a, maybe I'm looking at it incorrectly, but there's a bullet point that says childhood obesity is not a strong predictor of adult health conditions. So, you know, I think that's one of the arguments that that's kind of counterintuitive, let me say, because I would have thought like the diabetes that you mentioned and some other things, if you were an overweight child, you tend to be an overweight adult and have more health issues. But again, if I'm looking at this correctly, the bullet point says it is not a strong indicator.
Yeah, so that's correct. That has come from several meta-analysis on the subject. So I think it's important to keep in mind when we say obesity, I am including anybody with a BMI above this 95th percentile. So those are individuals who are kind of 1 pound over and individuals who are 100 pounds over. And so what we've seen with the relationship between BMI and health conditions like diabetes is that the risk is increasing quickly after that, right? So if I'm very close to that threshold, my risk may be the same as if I am just an overweight or even sometimes a normal weight individual. But it's when I get to that severe range of obesity that my risks take off. And so because there's so few individuals, especially children who fall into that category, it makes the predictive power a little bit weaker. And it's also important to remember that obesity and BMI are just one risk factor for things like diabetes and cancer. There are others as well, and so it would depend on whether a child has those additional risk factors.
Other questions? Questions? Panels? Oh, thank you, Mr. Peach.
Ms. Paisley, you talked about the health coordinators at the schools. Just a couple questions about that. Do you think that these meal plans could be improved, and are they maximizing the physical education time in the schools that you think would be satisfactory?
Yes, when you're mentioning the meal plans, you mean in the school cafeteria?
Yeah, right, correct.
And I'm sure you know, we all know, USDA has regulations for that. So our school cafeterias have to follow those recommendations and guidelines. And so they're pretty strict. There's some smart snacks guidelines from USDA just about the snacks that students have. So I think they try to do a pretty good job on the federal level. As far as physical education and physical activity, many of you may know we have a physical education law in Tennessee and a physical activity law in Tennessee that I'm pretty proud of when I talk to my other state colleagues that do the same job. We have an annual PEPA report that we submit annually October 1st to the Governor and the General Assembly. It's on our website. That might be something that I'd be happy to get to you guys, as I mentioned about the diabetes numbers, that will give you a snapshot of how it's going in our schools across the state. I think physical education, and I'm so glad you asked this because a lot of people, nobody in this room, get physical education and physical activity confused. Physical education, as you all know, we were all students, is to be taught by a qualified, certified physical educator, and there are standards for physical education. It is a class that our students take. Elementary, unfortunately, gets it more than high school students because, you know, when we're in high school, there's a lot more going on. But physical activity is just physical activity that hopefully we all get every day, at least 3 to 4 times a week, where sometimes you may just go for a walk. And so our students are to get that within the classroom during the school day. And you all look like you might sit in meetings a lot. I do that sometimes, probably not as much as you, but you know when you're sitting in one of those long 4 to 5 hour meetings, you need to get up and stretch your legs, but it needs to be more than just getting up and stretching your legs. You need to move, you need to get your heart rate up, and so what we do with the physical activity law in Tennessee is we just make sure that classroom teachers are getting our students up and moving during the day. Obviously, that causes some challenges during a Tennessee winter, but you also may know about Go Noodle. I hope you've all heard of that. It's not just a Tennessee-based business, but it's a Nashville-based business that is worldwide, and it gives teachers the opportunity to bring up on a screen like this some physical activity that kids can do. Go Noodle's done a great job in working with Tennessee educators to align their activities with lessons that teachers are teaching normally. So those are some things, some highlights that we're doing in the state, but I think you have a great question there. How are we doing with physical education and physical activity? And I believe that report will give you something good to read on that. I'll be happy to give that to you guys.
And I know that I'm definitely not a nutritionist, and my wife would echo that. But I know the USDA has these requirements. But I'd been looking at some of the lunches at our local schools, and I see, just tons of carbs, tons of those types of things. So I wondered if any of these schools are looking to go above and beyond those requirements of the USDA, those types of things. I think we all know it's all about convenience, affordability, and probably encouragement as well to remind. And until it's convenient, it's hard to be healthy until you make it convenient. And then it's also got to be affordable. But I appreciate what you do.
Yeah, I'll just add to that too. You're right on every level. The cafeteria managers in each of our schools also want to serve something the kids will eat, but then they have to follow the USDA guidelines. So I think you're right. We see a lot of carbs, but they're trying to balance what will they actually pick when they go through the line to put on their tray. And so they work really hard on the appearance of the foods, but I think you're tapping into something really important, the nutrition, but also the balance between carbs and protein. So they have a tough job, but I think they're always watching what the students are eating. They do a lot of studies on food waste. They study what kids are throwing away. So there's always work to be done, just like you said, so thank you.
The local markets are getting better about having some type of fresh foods. But I think until you have, no matter what community it is, until you have, on the corners that you have these types of foods that would not be consistent with the candy bars or those quick fixes, Red Bulls, everything else, that it's going to continue to be a problem. And obviously, there's all the regulations over, and I'm not big on regulation, but dealing with alcohol, cigarettes, those types of things, and we've stopped enticing children for those things, but we've not stopped enticing children for poor food choices, I guess. And I hope maybe that will come next, or at least those organizations help pay for those problems that they're causing.
Senator Lundberg, and then Mayor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for the Department of Health. Based on your testimony, I'm taking it that you really take a more holistic view when it comes to obesity. And by the nod, I'm taking that as a yes. My question is, and I'm not trying to be sarcastic, but if you could magically put a playground in every school and a farmer's market in every city, county, town, I don't know that would move the needle a lot. I think it has an impact as well. But candidly, it seems like there's some lower hanging fruit to make an impact much quicker than those things. What's being done in those higher priority areas? And I say that also with a view, because I'm in communications, of marketing and promotion, and when it becomes cool to do whatever it is. As a kid, frankly, you'd never convinced me that the green beans on my lunch tray were better than the pizza. I'm sorry, I'm just going for the pizza. And that holds true today. So, but you know where I'm going with the question.
Sure. We know that this really starts before a child is even born. So a mother's health when she's pregnant with a child is a great predictor of a child's health as well. And that's why the Women, Infant, Children program is so important. So in our departments, if a woman comes in and receives a pregnancy test, we can immediately sign her up on the spot for WIC. So she doesn't have to come back. It doesn't have to be a separate visit. We have WIC counselors in all of our clinics, and that's a really important service that we offer so that right away we can get the mother on the path to good nutrition. And again, this is a program that provides healthy nutrition for mothers while they're expecting and any children in the household who are at the age of 5 or under. So this is a way that we can look at nutrition again for that family unit and get that family unit on a strong trajectory from the beginning. This is separate from the SNAP program, so it's separate from the USDA guidelines. Another thing that we do is to really, again, counsel women when they're coming in for visits, if they're bringing in their children for a pediatric visit, we do make sure that we're talking about the nutrition that the child is receiving, the physical activity that the child is receiving. The best thing that we can do is to encourage, right? Because you're right. We can't we don't mandate things, obviously, and we're not trying to be the big brother, but we can provide the best information and the best access possible. The things that you are discussing, sure, those are a little bit of a longer term solution, but it is more of a challenge, and we do hear this anecdotally when communities don't have that opportunity for children to have a safe place to play, especially one that's free of use. And that's one thing that's very important for us when we're looking at these facilities in Tennessee communities, is that there shouldn't be a financial barrier to utilize them. We also, when we hear from folks about the challenge to getting to a grocery store, and one of the things we're actually looking with Dr. Barkin at now is there a solution to in our rural parts of our state to have more of a food delivery service so that we can overcome some of the barriers of some of our counties not having a full service grocery store. So you're correct that even if we do have those amenities, we can't, we don't know that folks are going to use them. We don't know that that's the silver bullet. But you're also very astute in saying that this is a multifaceted solution. There is some low-hanging fruit. We try to do what we can in our clinics. The schools certainly try to do what they can do within their doors as well. But outside of the school doors and outside of our clinic doors lies the community's spaces in which we're spending the other, if it's children, the other, 16 or so hours of their day. And so that's where we're trying to make sure that we're looking at all of the hours of the day and all of the supports that we can provide where children are going as they move from one spot to another.
Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come from a long line of big-boned people, which is, as you know, code for fat people, but where families knew how to cook, they knew how to season it well, but it wasn't necessarily healthy. Now, it wasn't bad when they were plowing with mules and working all day and, you know, actually using and needing all of those things that we don't because of the way we work and live now. So I guess in listening today, what comes to my mind is the ability for not only our cafeteria workers, but for our parents and providers to be able to prepare healthy foods that taste good, you know, so that he'll eat his green beans. And so I think, to me, that you know, the old home ec and, you know, because there were, you know, right, wrong, or indifferent between the sexes, there were certain roles, so at least somebody was getting some education on it. Now we need to be educating everybody, but instead we're probably educating fewer on how to prepare quality food that will also taste good. And so I hope there's some work towards that going on, because I don't know otherwise, you know, when my big bone grandchildren come along, you know, that there'll be anything much different.
Are there other questions? Yes.
Just a question about, is there any data out there about concerning video games and iPads and, you know, and back years ago when I was growing up, you didn't have all those, so all you did, you had to go outside and ride your bicycle or do something like that. And now, just an observation from my grandkids, they're playing Super Mario, which they want me to play all the time, and I get killed when I try to play it. But they're playing Super Mario, or they're watching an iPad, and they're not getting that physical activity that folks used to get. Is there any data that indicates how significant that is?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of studies at the national level, and I'll look to my colleagues to see if we have that for Tennessee, but it is more than you would ever think it could possibly be. It almost seems like more than there are hours in a day that we spend on screens.
My team at the Office of Coordinated School Health, we conduct, in partnership with the CDC, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. It's the the YRBS is what we lovingly call it. We do that every other year, and there's a random selection of high schools, and those students complete this Youth Risk Behavior Survey. We have the results of that, and one of the questions that we ask is your question. We ask them, I believe the correct language is, in the past 7 days, how much have you played video games? And it is alarming, and it has gotten worse as the years go on. But again, if you would like, I would be happy to share the results of our last administration of the YRBS with you. And that tells us about Tennessee students, but we can also compare our state, much like someone said with diabetes, looking at Tennessee and then how do we compare with other states. These are our high school students, and they're the ones that are probably playing video games longer than the younger kids, sometimes maybe not, but we do ask that question and we can get you those results.
Vice Chairman Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you to all of you for the presentation today. I would be remiss for not taking this opportunity, Director Paisley. A year ago, when our schools were closed in Cleveland, Tennessee, the Coordinated School Health were so prominently apparent in the delivery of food to our high-risk students who were, just because they weren't at school, did not mean that they were not in search of something nutritious to eat. So we had school buses full of meals, and your team did an amazing job. And I have not seen anyone since then, but as a father and a grandfather, there were many parents incredibly grateful for the hard work that you all did during that very difficult season. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would be remiss if I didn't let you all know that the person that just spoke was our Superintendent of the Year for Coordinated School Health. So that means a lot coming from you, so thank you very much. But exemplary Coordinated School Health programs in Cleveland and Bradley County, and they work together. It's not a either or. We're all in this together to help our students and our families. So thank you so much, and I'll let them know that you gave them a little praise today.
Thank you. I have a question for our friend from the Department of Health. In your comments, you mentioned that there were some counties that did not have a park, which candidly surprised me. Was it schools or counties?
We've had some communities that have told us that they don't have a playground in an entire
Okay,
county.
I believe I said park and I misspoke. Playground.
Sorry. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Go on.
And we're getting this from the applications that we receive. So again, in any given year for these Healthy Built Environment grants, we're receiving upwards of 140, 150 or so applications from across the state. And all of the communities are required to tell us in their words how their economic climate and their health climate are tied together. And the applications all require that they identify an underserved section of the community. So again, a lot of them are really focusing on youth. And we are relying on what they are telling us, but it's really interesting to hear that there may be one playground and that playground hasn't been updated in 40 years. And so the equipment is so outdated that it's a liability for the children to use it. So that's what we're hearing from Tennessee communities, that there's particularly in our rural counties, and you know it as well as I, they just don't receive as many resources historically. And so some of these places for play are no longer safe for children.
And my follow-up question would be on these playgrounds or these communities that have either inadequate or unsafe playgrounds or no playgrounds. the $800,000 that you referred to in the budget, is that targeted to these communities? Or is it,
oh, I'm sorry, I cut you
no,
off.
is this targeted to these communities specifically?
So what we do, to answer your question, is we do provide an opportunity for communities to receive more points on their application depending on their economic status. So we tend to give more of the funding to communities that are struggling. There's Tier 3, Tier 4 communities, the at-risk and distressed counties in Tennessee. And that is intentional on our part. Now, the hard part is you can have, for example, so in Mayor Anderson's county, it may be the most affluent county in the state, but there are pockets in that county that are definitely struggling. And so you can have an application from a county such as Williamson, but if you're only looking at that data for the county, it's not, I'll say it this way, I wish we could drill down a little bit more into a fine-grained level. But that's what we've been using for the past few years. And just, again, based on the interest that we're seeing from these communities that really feel that they don't have a community center, for example. A lot of communities are looking to repurpose a community structure and turn it into an indoor community center where they can have basketball and other activities in inclement weather. We have a lot of communities that are looking to do some sort of multi-use sport court so that they can use it for a variety of different sports. And so it's really, really interesting to see the level of interest in these communities and the amount of amenities that they do not currently have.
So I'm hearing you say that we do try to give some advantages to communities on these without playgrounds by scoring additional points on their application, but the application process is open to everybody, even a community that may have multiple playgrounds. I would just suggest that perhaps we consider offering additional points for the community in addition to being economically at risk or distressed, but that doesn't have a playground.
Sure.
Yeah, because you can logically say that a community that's economically distressed might not have funds for a playground, but not always. And so I would suggest, in addition to scoring more, awarding points for being in that category of being distressed or at risk, that we look at maybe if you offer an additional points for those that demonstrated no playgrounds. Seems like that would be bring some more relevance to it, I think.
Thank you for that. And there is a whole set of scoring criteria that we do use, and that demonstration of need is one of them. So we do take into account those that really have not a whole lot to begin with.
Perhaps I don't want to tie the committee's time up, but I'd like to continue this discussion with you. Maybe we could do that outside. Okay.
Sure.
Other questions, gentlemen, ladies? Well, there being none, it was an excellent presentation from the panel and some very good probing questions. And I will give it back to Mr. Van Sant. Doctor, did you have any closing remarks or anything you wanted to bring to us?
Lord Paisley wants to make one correction.
I'm so sorry. Chairman Brooks was Legislator of the Year, which is an even bigger deal. I don't know what to call him these days, but I just want to say
we know plenty what to call him.
It just hit me, and I wanted to make that.
I am, of course, joking.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I would
Sorry about that.
Sorry. Thank you. We'll correct the record. Just to thank the panelists again. I think it was very informative.
Thank you.
Very good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I can move us on. We'll go to update on House Bill 366, Senate Bill 1604 on right-of-way dedications. I believe Ms. Eldridge, our Senior Research Director, is going to make give us the update, and I will turn it over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. This year's Senate Bill 1604 by Senator Bailey and House Bill 366 by Representative Williams was introduced in the legislature. After the bill was introduced, the Lieutenant Governor and House Speaker sent a letter to the Commission requesting that we study the bill. This bill would affect local government's ability to require dedications of property by property owners as a part of the subdivision plat approval process, and the bill was brought up because of concerns about the constitutionality of these dedications. A draft of the bill will be presented at the next commission meeting, but today I will present an update on the research that we've done so far. First off, I'll briefly go into some background about dedications. Then I'll briefly describe some of the provisions of the bill and some of the other states' research that we've conducted over the past few months. When property is subdivided, it can have spillover effects on the community. It can lead to increased demands on infrastructure. For example, there might be an increase in traffic. Before subdivisions of property are approved, local governments, including their planning commissions, may require property owners to dedicate land or an easement along roads. They may require these dedications along existing roads that either are not wide enough to accommodate the new development or fail to meet the width requirements of the local major street or road plan. In the right-of-way, infrastructure can be built or existing infrastructure can be improved. However, this can result in additional costs for the community. With dedications, the property owner bears some of the costs of the additional infrastructure needed as a result of the subdivision of the property, but the total cost of the improvements does not have to be borne by the community as a whole, since local governments typically don't pay property owners for dedications. The U.S. Supreme Court has held that governments can require dedications subject to certain limitations. In the case of Village of Euclid versus Ambler Realty, the U.S. Supreme Court recognized that land use regulation is a valid exercise of a government's police power, which is the power to regulate health, safety, and public welfare. However, if a government goes too far, this can result in a taking under the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. This is what is known as a regulatory taking. A regulatory taking is where a government enacts a law or undertakes an action that results in a de facto taking of property for which compensation is warranted. The U.S. Supreme Court has developed a number of tests to assist in determining when a regulation or governmental action crosses this line and becomes a taking. For dedications, the U.S. Supreme Court has developed a two-pronged test known as the Nolan-Dolan test. The court developed the test in two cases, Nolan versus the California Coastal Commission and Dolan versus the City of Tigard. The first prong of the test requires the government to show that there is an essential nexus between the between the asserted legitimate state interest and the permit conditions imposed by the government. The second prong is that the government must demonstrate a rough proportionality between the dedication imposed and the impact of the development. In the Dolan case opinion, it was written that no precise mathematical equation is required, but the city must make some sort of individualized determination that the required dedication is related both in nature and extent to the impact of the proposed development. The question is there anything you can do to help ensure that dedications fall within the limits of Nolan-Dolan? The bill referred to the Commission for Studies, Senate Bill 1604, House Bill 366, was brought because of concerns about the constitutionality of dedications. It would prohibit a local government from requiring dedications along existing right-of-ways as a condition of approving any application made to the government. A government could require a reservation where the parties negotiate an agreement for an area designated as a location of a future right-of-way in a major road or street plan. With the reservation, the property is reserved for purchase by the government in the future, and if the government takes possession of the property, the owner is entitled to just compensation. A property owner could agree to a dedication, but they could not be required to dedicate property. A subsequent purchaser of the property could convert a reservation to a dedication. As a part of the study, we also looked to other states' laws to see how they've addressed this particular issue in their laws. We found one state, Massachusetts, that had a statute that requires the local governments to pay property owners just compensation for dedication. There are 3 states, Delaware, California, and Louisiana, that place restrictions on when dedications can be required or how much land can be dedicated. In Delaware, property owners cannot be required to dedicate right-of-way along a state highway if the property being subdivided is farmland. There is also a requirement that the right-of-way is not deemed to be necessary because of safety issues by the State Department of Transportation, and the property must continue to be used as farmland. And there is also a requirement that the property cannot be subdivided into more than 2 parcels. The property owner also has the option of giving this or transferring this property to a family member, but the property must continue to be used as farmland or it's a principal residence of that person. Let's see, in California, a property owner can't be required to dedicate land for parks or recreational purposes if the parcel is going to be subdivided into less than 5 parcels and it will not be used for residential purposes. A Louisiana state law limits dedications to no more than 5% of the gross area of a proposed subdivision in New Orleans. Other states have passed laws that can help to guide local government's decision-making on dedications and make sure that they meet the requirements of Nolan Dolan. Of these, 5 states, Arizona, Colorado, Minnesota, Texas, and Utah, incorporate all or part of the language from the Nolan Dolan two-pronged test and state that the dedications must comply with these requirements. We found 4 states, Louisiana, Montana, Nevada, and North Carolina, which have language in their statutes that require dedications be reasonably necessary or reasonably related to the infrastructure needed. 4 states, Washington, Texas, Idaho, and Louisiana, require written analysis of dedications. Washington State requires local governments to make written findings that appropriate provisions are made for the public health, safety, and general welfare in the subdivisions, and that public use and interest will be served by the platting of such subdivision and dedications. Texas requires the local government to complete a takings impact analysis of dedications. They must describe the specific purpose of the dedications. They have to identify the burdens on private property and benefits to society resulting from the dedications. Local governments must also determine whether engaging in the dedication will constitute a taking and describe reasonable alternative actions which could accomplish the same purpose. One major omission is that cities are exempt from this requirement except in very specific circumstances. Idaho authorizes private property owners to request that a local government do a written takings analysis of a regulatory or administrative action. And in Louisiana, a governmental entity has to prepare a written assessment of any proposed governmental action that will likely result in a diminution of the value of private agricultural property. We found 4 states, Utah, Texas, Idaho, and Washington, that require local governments or the state attorney general to develop guidelines for local governments to help them evaluate regulatory actions and help to ensure that they're constitutional and not a taking. So in conclusion, the U.S. Supreme Court has held that local governments have the authority to require dedication subject to the limitations of the Nolan Dolan test. The question is how to ensure local governments comply with these requirements. Other states have passed laws that include requiring local governments to pay just compensation for dedicated property along roads, limiting the use of dedications in certain circumstances, putting the language from the Nolan Dolan test in state statute, and requiring analysis of dedications. We will present a draft of the report at the next commission meeting. Thank you again for your time and attention. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Do we have questions? Yes.
Just a few questions for you, following up on your comments. As I look at the Supreme Court's holdings, it would have, am I correct that this bill as proposed would be inconsistent with the precedent of the United States Supreme Court, which has authorized local governments the right to engage in dedication, requiring dedications with limitations?
Yes, I think so.
And as it exists now, any situation would be a case-by-case determination where if a developer felt aggrieved by the scope of the required dedication, he could pursue a remedy in court to determine whether or not there was the appropriate nexus and proximity and the other requirements as set forth by the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Has there been any effort made to determine the physical impact on local government if this bill should be enacted?
We have contacted the Division of Property Assessments to see whether or not they have any information on, how much property has been dedicated in the state. They said they didn't have any. We have reached out in a survey to the local planners to kind of try to get a sense of how much property is dedicated, but we didn't get a lot of response on that particular survey. But we'll continue to try to determine the fiscal impact as we continue our study.
Do we have anything at this point with regard to our work on this that indicates the significance of how often these dedications are required, whether or not it's something that's sporadic or whether it's something that is regularly occurring in local governments?
We did ask those questions on the survey, and we will report that in our draft report.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Are there other questions, Mayor?
I had a question, and I was trying to see if it had to do with a certain state or this bill. That what did you say about the farmland? That as long as it was continued to be used as farmland, but if it were, I thought you said something about that if it were changed to be used for residential, then it would not.
Oh, in
it would not
Delaware,
apply?
if they wanted to transfer property to a family member, they could not be forced to dedicate property, but that particular family member would have to continue to use the property as farmland or as their principal residence.
Okay, and that is part of this?
Yes. Oh,
Okay.
it's other states.
Okay.
That's what they do in Delaware.
Oh, okay, so that's something to consider here,
Yeah.
correct. The other question I had is, and it may be a very clear answer. It said this bill also specifies that a real estate agent has no duty to inform any party to a real estate transaction concerning a right-of-way reservation. Why is that?
Because I think the lobbyists for the realtors asked them to put that in the bill. I think they were concerned about liability.
Yeah.
So it could
I can
be
well imagine.
a surprise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there other questions? Mayor?
Well, first of all, any comment to California, it's not working because they're all moving to Tennessee, you understand?
Or Texas.
After our last report, I'm hesitant to bring it up, but I want to bring it up, so I'm going to ask the question. I'm probably going to make all of the city mayors mad. The county mayors will probably not respond to it. In many of the cities that I'm familiar with, there's a dedication of providing sidewalks. And when those entities go across county properties, they're required for us to get, now we could not be good players in the sandbox, but oftentimes cities' regulations, in order to get along and work within the community, you help dedicate areas for sidewalks, certainly for improvements in county property within the city limits. You don't deal with that in any way, and I could understand why. But being a county mayor, I think there needs to be an observational point put on that, that there's a great push to get this walking trails and all that, but you're not running those out into the rural areas to begin with as a normal way of life. They're usually in your suburban, around the cities. The county folks have got all the walking areas and trails they want, and they don't necessarily need sidewalks. But I do think, as a point of reference, this dedication right from a county's perspective, doing business inside the cities, needs to be addressed also, because it costs us extra money to get that done on our own property due to zoning within the cities. Hope I said that correctly. You're not mad?
I'm not mad.
Well, you're just trying to connect the trails. I understand that, and the sidewalks, but county residents are having to pay for these improvements in right-of-ways, and I've got many of folks out in the rural areas that could care less about sidewalks being put in the cities.
Are there other questions? Other questions? Oh.
What does this report do?
Mayor Brooks?
Director Lippert, when is the final, we mentioned that this was update, when is the final due?
So though this was a legislatively referred bill actually from both speakers, it did not have a formal due date. Our intent actually was originally to have a draft report by this meeting, but as we dug into the report and realized the complexity of the issue, it's particularly after we heard from several panelists last meeting, we have moved the draft report to the January meeting as our goal.
Okay. Other questions? Well, there being none, we sincerely appreciate the work that you've done, and we will look forward to seeing the report in January. I'm sure we'll have a robust discussion. And let me, I believe that takes us about to the end of the meeting today. Director Lippert, is there anything for the order of the group that we need to mention before we leave here today?
The only thing, Mr. Chairman, would be that we will reconvene here at 8:30 in the morning, and you may leave your docket book and related material here if you wish.
Mr. Chairman, Thank you. This is after the fact. That's kind of the way my mind works. Sometimes I'm a little slow. But in regard to the public health issues, your schoolyards, playground equipment, maybe they're, just recently I read a report, and it's very disturbing to me because I am a veteran, that our Afghanistan, Iraqi men and women, the suicide rate is just off the chart. And it's just very disturbing to me. And we're seeing a lot of that now in our Vietnam vets later in life, and things are resurfacing back. Maybe there could be a component between public health and our veterans. We don't see that division, and I've been around a long time. I've never seen a governor, but maybe this legislative body could look and address something with our veterans to work with our children and help build playground equipment or introduce them. I know you have to do background checks on everybody anytime you're around children. I get all that. But there's a lot of veterans that are just sitting around out here that would like to be useful again, and they're young and they're old. And maybe that's you talking about putting points in and which to build money into. That seems to me to be a very worthwhile thought process, and I don't know how you put all of it together.
Okay, you made a note. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Other comments before we move? Then we will recess until in the morning. If there's no objection, we stand in recess till 8:30 in the morning.